everyone. This is Andrew Beamon, and I am the author of From Promises to Progress, joining you on the show So Booking Cool with Jewel B. Stay tuned for my interview.
So fucking cool.
It's so motherfucking cool to listen to So Fucking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool. It's Jewel B. Today's guest is a leader in corporate social responsibility, racial equity, community engagement, and employee engagement, where he develops colleagues in community meaningfulness. He is the author of the high-rated book, From Promises to Progress, a leadership guide to help organizations avoid common mishaps and bring their racial equity aspirations to life. He is Andrew Beamon.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, Andrew. So would you say that you were someone as a kid who was a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always, actually, I might have played the supportive role as well. It was always where there was a void. I think that's where I usually step in. If anytime there's a void in leadership, I'm the one that would step up. And I had no issue supporting other great leaders. So, yeah.
That's excellent. Like, what age would you say you started to notice that you were like a supporting player or like a team player?
I would see it just playing outside, recess at school, playing football, getting into different sports leagues, baseball, like the sports that I was really good at, which was football. I mean, I was pretty small, but I was good at football. And that's where I would take the lead. The sport that I wasn't the best at, baseball, I knew how to play the supportive roles and help out.
Nice.
Basketball might have been, I was the guy who hustled in basketball. My jump shot wasn't good, so I would hustle, and I'll find other ways to help the team win. So that's what it's really all about. Just trying to, no matter what it is, when you have the goals, you have the same mission, trying to find your role to help win.
Yeah, to help win. Wow. So you were good in a variety of sports, it sounds like. You did what you had to do in a variety. Now, what about, you have me curious now, when it comes to group projects, were you the person who volunteered to kind of steer the ship, or how would you say you approached that?
I think I find myself being the one who has to steer the ship more and more often. As I've gotten older, got into the professional career. Maybe it wasn't so much in high school or in college, but once I entered, the professional career, working in consulting and working for nonprofits, more and more I was being called to lead. So I think that's really the difference. I don't feel like I ever said, hey, I have to be the leader. And I was always had leader as the target. People just started asking me to do it because they saw something in me and they thought, hey, we want you to lead it. And I just respond to when I'm called to lead.
And what are those traits that you think make someone think this person is a leader?
Good question. First one is people want you to lead. People want to follow you. That's probably like the easiest one. But just getting more specific about like skill sets, I would say it's more around emotional intelligence, just emotional intelligence. So if it's everything along the lines of just being self-aware and self-management, social awareness, like all those aspects of emotional intelligence, but it's also knowledge. When they know you have the knowledge to lead and you could do it well based on your emotional intelligence, that's when they'll call you.
And what would you say is emotional intelligence? Do you think that's one of those things where it has a definitive answer, or it's how people look at it?
I think it has a definitive answer, and it's probably much harder when you're trying to put your finger on it sometimes because like you're watching someone do it, and you'll like if you see them in a meeting dealing with a tough colleague, and then you see the way they respond to it, and somehow they find a way to find some commonality and move the conversation along, and you see it happen, and you sit back and you wonder like, well, how did they do that, right? So sometimes you witness it and you're trying to figure out what it was that they did. Was it trying to find a way to compromise? Are they trying to find I guess things that they both agree on? So, but I think for the most part, it's just really slowing down because a lot of times, whether if it's your personal life or if it's in the business world, when you're angry, when you're emotional, when you're frustrated, you don't respond in a very in your best way, right? You're not your best self when you respond angry. I mean, even in sports, you play angry. Boxers who fight angry, they don't perform to their best of their ability. So just slowing it down and trying to manage and control your emotions and not be triggered or recognize your triggers and then just try to get to the solution. Many times you find yourself arguing or disagreeing about something separate from what the original disagreement was about, right? So if you just focus on what you're trying to accomplish and do it with less emotion, you could get through better.
Wow. I mean, I have so many questions to ask you.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely read a lot about emotional intelligence, and it's something that I'm always working on. I find myself sometimes after meetings or after interactions with family or coworkers, and I'm managing my my emotions, but I don't have control over them. You're thinking like, hey, let me take a walk, or hey, let me go exercise. You're trying to find a way to blow off steam because you're emotional about what's going on. But the more I read and the more I practice, some days are better than others. And, it feels good when you have it going pretty well. And I'll say
mhm.
this month, or not just this month, because we're at over the last month, I've been pretty impressed.
So when you say that you've been impressed, you've noticed then that you've improved with how you handle your emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I really feel like it just continues to improve. It's growth, and you have the ebbs and flows, and just recognizing when your lows are low, and then you could say, okay, that's not the way I should respond. That's not the way I should perform. Um, you're just recognizing your triggers, and just even, and this is important, especially when you're talking about like the topic of the book, when you're talking about anti-black racism, and you're talking about like diversity and inclusion, and or even corporate social responsibility. When you're in the community doing these things, and there's a lot of stressors, not only that you're going through, but maybe the employees are going through and the community is going through, and controversial topics. So these are the moments when you have disagreements that have high stakes to them. And when you have disagreements and high stakes and you're emotional about it, it's a cause for disaster.
Mm. First of all, what inspired your career path?
uh, Love of psychology and studying human behavior. Yeah, I found myself even when in undergrad, when I was studying business, I was doing my undergrad degree was in business, hospitality, and tourism administration. And then, you have your general classes that you usually have to take. But I still found myself, like, I would go to the library and I would find myself reading a little bit about something related to psychology before I actually do my work. So it was always there, studying human behavior. And then I just discovered, hey, this is something that you could do in the workplace. When I discovered organizational psychology, when you combine the business world and human behavior, studying how that translates into the business world.
Now, what about that kind of work being done in the business world appealed to you?
I needed it. To be quite honest. So after my undergrad, I was working in the restaurant business. So as a restaurant manager, I'm dealing with like 80 different employees, dealing with like 1,000 customers that come in and out. And I just always said to myself, it's so much less about memorizing the recipes, knowing the P&Ls really well, or anything else that I studied as far as macroeconomics, microeconomics, accounting. That always, you have the systems that you can manage, and it does that for you for the most part. You have the software already available. So I found myself thinking, if I knew how to manage people better, my life would be so much easier. It was less about the numbers, it was less about the recipes. And I said, hey, if I just could study psychology more, I could be a better leader. and my job could be 10 times easier. That's really why I studied organizational psychology for my master's degree. I really didn't have any intention on changing careers out of hospitality into the consulting world. So that's when I discovered this consulting world.
And it
Yeah.
just seems like you've been, killing it within that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I think everything that I've done so far, since '09
Mhm.
was everything kind of falls under that umbrella of organizational psychology, like what my major was. So if times where my focus was on employee engagement, that's just a piece of it. That's falls under an umbrella. If it's racial equity or it's corporate social responsibility, all these are different aspects of human behavior in the workplace and in the community and improving the cultures of the workplace.
Improving the cultures of the workplace. And I also noticed what you said, Andrew, that when you were working in the restaurant industry,
Yeah.
you said your life would be easier if you just knew how to manage better. Wow, that's really deep. What are your thoughts then on going hard, giving all that you've got, but then also working smarter and not harder?
Yeah, I'm all for the strong work ethic, and
Uh-huh.
that's what I have, and I think that's how I was able to grow in my career. Being the first one in, last one out. So I wouldn't say don't do that, but you get to the point in your career where you realize that there are cheat codes to it, and working smarter is definitely one of the cheat codes. Like don't slack on your work ethic, but that's just table stakes. Everyone should be putting in 100%. But how do you get past it? How do you differentiate yourself from everyone else that's putting in 100%, right? And I think that's where working smarter comes into play. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah. So then does it mean that if you're working smarter and not harder, that you're actually able to get more done then because of the cheat code?
Yeah. I mean, just for example, um, I think a lot of people have this myth of like the lone hero, like everything that we read about as a kid, superheroes or even other leaders in the community that we've read about, presidents. It was always about someone who did this, or even Thomas Edison, like these geniuses that done all these things, and we don't realize they've done this with help, right? So your network is extremely important, and that helps. Um, Reaching out for help, talking to people, knowing where your weak spots are, and knowing who you have to partner with to get that done. Like I'm not the best when it comes to like creating like the content that I'll put on in a PowerPoint is good. The content's great, but the design's horrible. So like I had to learn. All right, well, this is not something that I do well. Let me partner with someone as I'm creating my PowerPoints for what I'm doing. Even like this back here from Promises to Progress, creating that banner. I have someone in my family that's great at graphic design. So just identifying where you need help and not being afraid to ask for help because no one's doing any of this alone. Like President Barack Obama, he didn't become president alone. He had help from a lot of people.
So speaking of promises to progress, when did you feel called to write a book and how did you know that sending, the message and the information is the best way to reach people within a book?
Oh, yeah, it is. That is the dilemma sometimes, right? Like as you have this show, you probably think about like a lot of people are learning more on video on YouTube or learning more on watching documentaries. They're learning so much, and less people maybe opening up books. So, but I chose this because it definitely feels like the more permanent medium, right, as opposed to doing a video. And I was called to do this in 2020, but I was doing so much reading and prep work before then. Like 2017 and 2018 is where I decided I wanted to really dig down deep into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And was it, yeah, the start of 2018, I dedicated myself. I said, I'm gonna read 15, at least 15 of the best books on DEI, and I'm just gonna immerse myself in it. And also, I did the executive certification at Georgetown. It was a 6-month certification on strategic diversity, equity, inclusion management. But so that was like as I was prepping to do it, and I did notice a void in some of the topics that were being addressed
Mhm.
in diversity, equity, and inclusion books. And so when 2020 hit after the murder of George Floyd, and I'm seeing everyone scramble, like from mayors, so people running cities, states, or running corporations, nonprofits, all around the board, all these leaders were scrambling trying to figure out, well, what do we do about racism? And that's when I felt compelled. Then I said, you know what? People have been asking me to write for a while. And this is the moment where I said, I have to start writing. So I began the writing process in December of 2020.
Wow. And who was the first person, do you remember, that you shared, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to
Mm.
finally do what people have been asking me. I'm going to do it.
Oh yeah. Um, let's see, who did I say yes to when they said you need to write a book? It may have been my stepfather. My stepfather might have been the first one that I said, all right, I'm going to do it. And he said, "Yeah, you really should. You really should." I'm like, "No, when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it." That's one of my leadership skills. That might be why people call me to lead. It's everyone has different skill sets of leader as a leader. It may be influence, maybe strong, maybe really good at strategy. Mine is always execution. If I say I'm going to get something done, I'll get it done. And he was the first one that I said, "I'll get it done."
Nice. So I can imagine he's very proud of you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So when it comes to DEI, right, do you think most companies tend to get it right or no?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I think most don't. Um, I work in corporate social responsibility. That's for my 9 to 5. Uh, but I hesitate many times to work directly for a company that's hiring for DEI roles because um, they don't seem to get it right. They have a different perspective of what a DEI role should look like than I do. And this is maybe that's another good thing about me writing the book. So if someone wanted to hire me for that role, they already know the way I define how that role should look when you step in.
Now,
Um,
well, go ahead.
yeah. Oh, it tends to be event planning. You see a lot of what organizations are doing with DEI tends to be focused more on the events, like what I would call more like bread and circuses. So feed them well, entertain them, and we can just continue business as usual. And that's one of my concerns, and that's where I felt compelled to really write this book because I felt like it's really my responsibility to write this and point things out, and it almost in protest of how these roles have been managed or defined. And yeah, and that was really my approach as I was writing. What I was coming from the perspective of most organizations are doing X and it's not working. Let's try Y. That's right.
And who are the people that you think benefit the most, or who did you write the book for?
I wrote it for multiple groups. So first, leaders. It's really for those that have already read the other DEI books, or just um, those that after the murder of George Floyd recognize that systemic racism exists in the world, and that includes even their own organization or their own city. So they recognize that as a truth, and they want to do something about it, but they just don't know how. I think there's a lot of other books that already prove the case for that diversity matters, and they prove the business case that with more diversity, you have better ideas, you're more creative, you can improve the bottom line, all those types of things. It's a lot of great books out there that have already made that case. So mine is really to pick up where they left off. All right, you believe this to be true. Now, how are you executing it? And because a lot of times we look at the best practices that are going around on how to improve equity in the workplace, those are the ones that I'm pointing out to say, hey, maybe that's not the right route. That's not working, or it's actually more the window dressing going on. So if you really want to improve this piece of equity in the workplace, this is the route you could go. And the other thing with a lot of the books that I've read, it glazed over race.
Mm.
It would talk about all the different aspects of diversity and why differences are important, but they never really, it, what they tend to call it, which they were saying in 2020, uncomfortable conversations, right? Like, oh, we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. It is a topic that tended to be taboo before the murder of George Floyd. Like, no one wanted to say racism or racial discrimination in the workplace. Those that were doing the work of DEI or HR or any other role at an organization, they would usually use vague terms like, "Oh, we have diversity problems," or "unconscious bias." There's some biases that exist. Everyone was afraid to actually name the specific problem. If racism was the problem, they should name it and say, racism is the issue that we're dealing with in our city, or racism, systemic racism, is what we're dealing with at our organization. But because most organizations tend to stay away from that, they were never able to truly address the problem when you make the vague statements of diversity or biases.
Why the reluctance, you think, for them to call it for what it is?
It's the conversation that they continue to avoid because of the history around racism, and also people may not be as well versed in what systemic racism is, right? Um, Obviously there's great books out there. You have like the new Jim Crow, that Michelle Alexander, that breaks down like what that looks like, all the systems of racism that exist that affect us today. So it could be just a lack of knowledge when it comes to history. I mean, as you see, there's states that don't even want to teach about racism, or about the history of America, about slavery, or about any or Jim Crow. They're not teaching this anymore. So we're going to get more leaders that end up in, or more people that end up in leadership positions that do not even understand the history of the country or understand the history of their own company, right? I could
Wow.
go into that too. Yeah, well, the thing that comes to mind when I think about your own company, it's just important to know the history of your own company or of your own industry, to get in there and try to do the work and build relationships with the Black community, and you don't even know the relationship that your company or your industry has with the Black community, that you're only going to make mistakes. There's only gonna be more mishaps. Um, I mean, COVID-19 is probably a good example, as uh, the government and healthcare companies were trying to get the Black community to take the shot.
Mhm.
Knowing the history of medical violence could help you with your approach to how you're engaging with the Black community. But if you just ignore the history, you're going to run into mishaps, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that very like current example, right? That's and recognizable too. When it comes to people, they're in the job hunting stage of their life, on interviews, do you think that it would be okay to question the company or whoever you're interviewing with about how they approach DEI or something related to that?
It's the trend. It's actually a trend right now. Not only about DEI, but about corporate social responsibility. They wanted most millennials, or was it Gen Z now? They're asking those questions before they come to start working for a company. They want to know, like, what are their philanthropic efforts look like? What volunteerism are their employees doing in the community? What's the cause that this organization is getting behind? Even if you look at like a lot of the startups, a lot of the startups that came about, seems to be that trend over the last maybe 2 decades, but at least over the last decade, where most companies that launch, they add in a purpose-driven strategy to it. Like, you buy like Bomba socks. You buy a pair of socks, undershirts, underwear from them. They send the same. They'll match it and send it to a homeless shelter, right? So you buy a pair of socks, they send a pair of socks. So everyone seems to be adding this more conscious capitalism approach to what they're doing, and employees are asking. And so those that have choices as they're going out and interviewing from multiple companies, as they're getting out of college, or those currently in the workforce, that question does come up, and I think most HR recruiters should be ready for that question.
You talk about also in Promises to Progress, racial equity aspirations. So tell us more about that and what those aspirations are and should be.
Yeah. So the focus of my book, unlike I guess other DEI books, actually I don't even like calling it a DEI book. It's a racial equity book. It's specifically talking about racial equity because I feel as though that's a subject that has been avoided. There's not a lot of books. I think a few have come about over the last few years that are specifically talking about racial equity in the workplace. So I'm glad there's more literature on that as well. Um, the aspirations. So the aspirations go back to the promises that many companies and cities were making in 2020. Um, and I think that was a good thing that they were making these promises, right? They were like the large organizations, like the Microsofts, the Googles, the Apples. They were recognizing, making their statements that racism does exist, systemic racism does exist, and we need to do something about it. And they were even uh, listing some of the goals. Some of them were like increase the amount of uh, people of color in leadership positions by 50%, or double the amount of Black executives by 2030. So these are all these goals that they were making to achieve by 2025 or 2030. A lot of organizations were doing this. So that's their aspiration. They want to improve racial equity by 2025 or 2030. And that date is coming pretty fast, right? We're in 2023. So the question is, how are they doing so far, and will they meet that goal? And as I was watching and listening to these aspirations and these promises being made by many leaders, I thought there's no way they'll be able to achieve this goal by 2025 or 2030 by continuing to do the same things they're doing, or doubling down on the same old DEI practices, like the more unconscious bias training, or having or changing different ads or slogans. That wasn't really going to achieve the goal. That's not going to improve racial equity. So that's where I really felt the need and responsibility to say, hey, if this is truly your aspiration, here goes a guide to kind of help you achieve this. If it's not your aspiration, then you don't have to read this book. you know, you. But I want to meet people where they're at, and for those that are ready to do the work, I want to have a, a guide to help them achieve it.
What were the successes and any adversities that you overcame and experienced when writing From Promises to Progress?
Wow. Yeah, the writing process, right? Oh, well, I'm a great researcher. That's what I research. I do very well. But this is my first book, so the challenge was being able to tell a story and tell these stories in interesting ways to make it readable, make people want to read it. So it came with practice. So what I did was I began writing articles. So I just started writing articles and I would publish them on LinkedIn just to practice um, my voice, practice my writing voice, and then also getting the feedback, getting feedback from people when I would write, and that gave me more confidence as I was writing and putting, like once you hit that publish button, it's out there, and you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what kind of backlash you may receive from other people in your industry or other people outside of the industry, future employers. You don't know. So that was part of the practice. But I got a writing coach. And what I did was, as I was writing different chapters and just trying out different things and different ideas, I would send it over to my writing coach, and I'll say, "What do you think?" And and the interesting part of the process was telling more of myself. Like, I want to share what to do, but I didn't want to tell a lot about myself. And she would always ask me that. She'll say, "Hey, um, well, tell me more about you here, or tell me, or how did you feel when this happened?" And I'm like, "Okay, I got to tell my feelings. I got to tell how I felt." So it was it was that process of being more vulnerable and sharing more about myself as I was writing, where the coaching really helped me.
And do you see why that was why that was good advice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that was the positive feedback that I did get back from people that know me. People that know me that read the book, they said they were talking more about the stories that I was sharing about myself. And and I said, "Hey, I almost just scrapped the whole preface. I almost scrapped it because I didn't want to share my own. I did not want this to be a book of me um uh not complaining, but just venting about different inequities that happened to me. I didn't want the book to be about me just sharing my stories of my inequities that happened to me. I wanted to be a guide to help leaders, implement racial equity in the workplace. But a friend of mine did. He told me, he said, "You know what? I got so much out of that. I learned so much more about you. And in order for me to actually read your book, I want to know who's writing the book, right? I want to know who this story is coming from and why they're writing it." And it was so important that you left that preface there to tell your story, because other than that, he would have been missing out on really understanding who he's like learning from. Yeah.
Yes, I want to hear more about your thoughts on the feedback that you've gotten. I mean, the book does have
Yeah.
five-star rating,
Okay.
and do you have any favorite feedbacks that you've gotten?
Uh, yeah, yeah. My favorite feedback actually came from. Did they write it on Amazon? Can't remember if she wrote it on Amazon. Maybe she did. But Sakari Pinnick. Sakari Pinnick is the founder and the director of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program at Georgetown. And getting her feedback, just on, actually, she commented on LinkedIn when I posted about the book, and uh, just how she mentioned it, just said this was just extremely valuable book. So just having her endorsement on the book, and and she even told me that she bought multiple copies to send it to people that had questions about certain things when it came to racial equity. So just getting her stamp of approval on the book, and not so much of just writing a comment on LinkedIn, but that she respected the book so much where she would buy it and send it to other people. So yeah, that was the feedback that really made me feel as though, like, okay, this is something that's valuable for everyone.
Yeah, that is powerful when someone does that. Yeah. So what makes you recommend a book to someone?
Let's see. Um, it has to be different. It just has to be different. I'll absolutely recommend books that I don't know, it's probably the same as when you're watching a movie and you're just sitting there and you're thinking, someone needs this. Someone needs to read this. This is like a must watch, or this is a must see. And it's the book where you're just writing notes all day. Like a book that you just can't put down. If it's a book that you truly can't put down, or it has you jotting notes and also challenging your own preconceived notions, like those, yeah, that definitely gets you too. Um, Malcolm Gladwell is good at that. Right? You'll have certain ideas about a certain topic, and then he'll he'll throw you a curveball, like, didn't think about it from that way.
Is Malcolm Gladwell, is he someone whose work that you like?
Yes, yes, I like his work.
What's something that you would ask him if you could, if you have not already?
Mm. Oh man, that's a good question. Um, I would like to know like how he finds these new uh I guess conventional wisdom. Like, so there's new things to challenge that tends to be conventional wisdom, right? Um, so he does that really well. He'll take something that everyone just commonly believes, and then he'll challenge it. And I think that's the angle that I approach with my book as well. I looked at what most organizations were doing that may have been listed as best practices, and I tried to expose the myths about that. So just challenge it, expose it as myths, and give a different perspective of what most people in the industry are doing.
What are one of those myths, Andrew?
I think one of the biggest myths would be that most organizations think training is the answer to everything. In cities too, cities as well. Like if you think about when it comes to police reform, like
Mhm.
anytime there's an unarmed black man who gets shot, the first thing people think about is training. Well, you have to improve the training, right? But many times it's not the training, right? Training has its uses, but I, the reason why most organizations and companies and cities run the training, because it's the easiest, quickest fix, and you don't have to. It's almost like just a low hanging fruit. It's something that they have available. It doesn't change the system, but it has high visibility. So it's something highly visible you could do. You could check the box and say, "Well, we did training." But s- for a specific example, you look at
Mhm.
Ferguson, Missouri. When they did the audits, the Department of Justice audited the police department, and they found there was like over 161 complaints of uh, misuse of force that was being done, and out of the 161, only like one was responded to, and there was no disciplinary actions at all. They found um, number of emails going back and forth, racist emails going back and forth. So it was the audit that exposed what's going on. A training wouldn't have changed the culture. A training would have stepped outside of the office, went through the training, and went back into the same toxic environment that they left the day before. So the biggest myth, and this applies not only for diversity or unconscious bias training, most leadership trainings that are conducted um, are done because they think it's the quick fix, and it's not the silver bullet for everything.
Is it also that it's not just the training itself?
Mm.
Is that what people are missing? Some of the companies, it's not the
Yeah.
training alone.
Yeah, yeah. It's true. Not against training. Just to be clear about that. I'm not against training at all. But when you're trying to figure out what you're going to implement to fix something, you have to know exactly what you're trying to fix. And sometimes training doesn't fix that. And I think training works really well when you're implementing something new. Like let's say you're implementing you're not only teaching people about unconscious bias, but you're implementing a new system in your recruiting. Now you have to train your recruiters or whoever else in the company that's conducting the hiring. You're training them on the new system that should help improve the racial equity and help and help improve it in that way. So, or even if it's announcements, maybe you're just sharing. I think this is the same with those months of significance, right? Black History Month or
Mhm.
Juneteenth. I'm for one that I think the myth is that doing events like that is actually systemic change. That's another big myth. If you ask people, what have you done between 2020 when you made these promises and told us about your aspirations of improving racial equity? What have you done in the last 3 years? Most companies and leaders will say they'll talk about the events that they created, right? They'll tell you about the Juneteenth thing that they did, the holiday, or they'll talk about the event that they put together. We had this dinner, and then we had this celebration. We even had people come and talk about their experiences. But did you change anything at the organization? Is the question. So I think when you gather everybody together and you're having these events, not against parties either. If you want to have fun and that's the culture of your organization to have these celebratory events, go for it. Stick with your culture. But maybe you could use that as Tom Joyner used to say, a party with a purpose. Like have the radio show host. Um, he would say, "We're going to have a party with a purpose." So if you have those events, that's a great time to inform all of the employees about the actual systemic changes that you made over the last year, since last Juneteenth or since last Black History Month. What has been done? What new things have you implemented at your company? How have your numbers changed? Are you sharing your actual demographic numbers? If your goal was to double the amount of black executives or double the amount or increase by 20%, 25% the amount of senior leaders that are minorities, what's the new numbers this year? Maybe you could share that with them and how you went about doing it.
Right. So is this a reflection of how you steer and come up with programs for
As
kind
far
of,
as
yeah.
far as auditing,
Just because your whole thing is to train, you train the company, you train colleagues on how to better contribute to the community, right?
yes, yes.
And also to be leaders. Am I getting it right?
um, yeah, community leaders. So
Community.
I, I build and implement programs to help employees get involved in the community. And yeah, so that's what I do for my 9 to 5 with a financial institution. We uh, helping employees, so we design programs to make ways for them to get involved. And I don't know if you're going here with your question, but I could share that I think that's one of the best ways to train people as well, like that experiential learning, having employees that go out into the community, and whether they're serving on a nonprofit board or they're just going off for a one-off volunteer activity, they're getting exposure to communities that they usually don't experience. Right, they're meeting people that may not be from their community. They may, so just being there and understanding the issues, the problems, the challenges that are going on in their city or outside of their city, but just in communities that they're serving as an employee. The more that they could do that, I think it gives them more of a transformational experience. Depending on the amount, you go out there for 2 hours a year, it probably won't change much. But studies show if you at least spend time, at least 16 hours volunteering, you'll start seeing a transformational change in who you are as far as empathy and and just understanding of those in your community. And it may change the way you lead in the workplace, right? when you have opportunities to think about who's being excluded and how this affects Black people and the Black experience at work.
What's your advice for Black people who are going through some of these issues in the workplace? Like, for example, looking for opportunities to grow and to get some of those executive positions, but
Mm,
it's not how do we deal with those kinds of things?
yeah, yeah. Well, that's also who the book is for. So we have the book is for the leaders to actually implement something meaningful and not just window dressing. And then it's also for employees to recognize when they're at a company that's doing window dressing as opposed to putting forward at something meaningful. Now, uh, one thing that I would say that there's a lot of times when when employees participate in like, business resource groups, like they may be in like the Black Experience group, or there's different affinity groups, employee resource groups, business resource groups. It goes by different names, but it's an opportunity to network, and also it's an opportunity to network, find mentors, and just learn from other Black people within your company. Right. And I think they'll be able to tell you a lot about the culture that's in your company and how to navigate and how to get through the politics of your company. I think that's a great place. But I also believe that we almost spend a little bit too much time uh, trying to train uh, Black people how to navigate racism. You know, there's there's some good sites. I love Diversity Inc. is a good site. They give you a lot of great tips on how to respond to racism as an individual. So I like to look at it. You have the individual plan and you have the system plan. My focus is more on the system plan, but the individual plan is important too because you're experiencing it. You're going to go through it because most likely you're going to be at a company that doesn't have the system set up right for you. Now, Diversity Inc. has great tools on uh, like how to respond to microaggressions, right? So there's a lot of good places that you could go to find out, you know, again, not having that emotional reaction and having some planned responses when you're dealing with um, coworkers that may be insensitive, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. By the way, love the title, Promises to Progress.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you have any runner-up titles?
I, you know, I, I didn't. I didn't. I was struggling. Well, as people would ask me as I'm writing, like, well, what's going to be the name of your book? Like, I'm not sure yet. I'll know when I'm finished. And and then this is what landed. No, there weren't any runner ups. Like out of all the things that I probably like ran by people and said, hey, what do you think of this? I don't think I ran the title by many people. This was really what I was going for. Like I just it fit the book perfectly as it was structured. Just had to make sure there wasn't a name out there like that already.
Right. Yes. I love that. And it does fit. Okay, what do you want people to know about you as an author, Andrew? And are there more books in your future that you will be writing?
Yes. Well, first I would say there could be a book coming. I didn't start working on it yet, but I do have an idea of a future book that I can't share. But what I will be doing over the next few years, that's probably a few years down the road before begin working on the next book. But you could expect more articles from me. The great thing about articles is that it doesn't take 2 years. Like writing this book took 2 years, and I wrote and I thought I was done after the first year. And then when I sent it over to my writing coach, and she also sent it over to a friend of hers that um, does publishing, and the feedback that I got was it's it's good, you're a good writer, but it's only your voice in this book. You need to have more voices. So that was just great feedback, and it changed. it completely changed the structure of my book because I spent the next 3 months interviewing people. I interviewed 15 leaders that work in diversity and inclusion, or other ones that work in HR, or just an executive at an organization. So I interviewed those 15, even interviewed two that were interns at a company. And from that, you know, as you know, when you do the interviews and you're transcribing and you're trying to find those gems within it, and then it took a whole nother year by the time I finished restructuring the book and incorporating the interviews into my book. So definitely a long process, and I'm very happy that I was encouraged to spend another year putting it together. But articles are quicker and it's just relevant to issues that are happening right now. Yeah. So I will be working on an article. I'll be working on an article coming up to help organizations as well as cities on how they can respond right now to the reversal of affirmative action. That decision that was made by the Supreme Court reversing affirmative action. I know many are trying to figure out what to do when it comes to their training or the books or their recruiting practices or even their promises and aspirations of in improving the percentage of people of color at their organization. So have to figure out what can still be done despite this reversal by the Supreme Court. So expect an article on that topic really soon.
Oh, good. We'll be on the lookout for that, and we can find that on your LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
So what is your advice for authors when it comes to voice? You did talk about voice, and just your advice in general for authors.
Yeah. Let's see. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself and don't give up. Because there was many times during the process where it just felt like it was taking forever. Like as I mentioned, it took 2 years. And you hear these stories about people that wrote a book in a month, or they only took 3 months to write their book. But I had to keep in mind that mine, I mean, it's many interviews, it's a lot of firsthand, secondhand research that's being done, and I just wanted to get it right. So I would say just be patient with yourself. It doesn't matter if your book takes 1 month or if it takes 10 years. Keep working on it until it's done, and get all the feedback you can. Utilize all the resources. I utilized Fiverr as well, like where I found people that just would proofread the book, and then even doing reformatting the book and like into the book outline. So use all the resources you can. Take your time and just get it right, and don't give up, because you'll regret it if you gave up.
And on that note, Andrew Beamon.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you as well. You're very welcome, Andrew, and thank you for coming on So Booking Cool. Definitely would love to speak with you again in the future. Okay, have you on again. From Promises to Progress is available. It's a must-have. People need to check it out. Let everyone know how they can keep up with you and how they can get the book.
Thank you so much, Jewel. You could go get the book Promises to Progress. You'll find it. It'll pop right up on Amazon. You could also go to my website and check out a couple of my articles as well. It's andrewbeamon.com. andrewbeamon.com. You'll find articles in my book and my contact information. So if you want to reach out, you could reach me. My email address will be on the site as well.
Would you say that we covered everything, Andrew, or is there something else that you want to get out there?
I think we did. It was great. It was an honor to be on your show, and maybe I'll come back again soon.
I appreciate the kind words, okay? And I hope it's more like a definite, so not yeah, okay? So any upcoming projects, you certainly are more than welcome to come back on, okay?
Thank you.
No problem. And thank you to all the viewers and listeners as well. Until next time, So Booking Cool.
So cool.